Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you, Ken?
I am good. Thank you for asking, Rory. You have joined us on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Rory and I are delighted that you have lent your ears today. In today's episode, 3 stops, starting off with that theory and practice, where we look at how theory applies itself in practice. And today, looking at those that may be preparing for a research project, some top tips coming your way. Then moving on to practice today, where we look at something contemporary in the world of counselling. And today we're going to be speaking about building in the ethical framework into your supervision sessions with your supervisor. How can you implement that to strengthen your practice? And then the Practice Matters, which is our CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast today, an interview with Kate Mahone from National Counselling Society talking about accreditation and course recognition, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a packed podcast. And I guess we start with that theory and practice, Ken.
We do. So preparing for a research project. And I think, if you're a student and you have to do a formal presentation of research, then that's one element of that. But I find myself researching topics on counselling all the time, Rory. So I think that this has a broad appeal and there is a way to go about it.
Absolutely. And I think that theory and practice absolutely sums up research, because you look at the raw theory, the dry theory, and part of your research, certainly if you're maybe doing a level 4 course, or maybe doing your last year of a degree where that's research, or even your master's degree, maybe to look at some theory and see actually how it's used in practice. Is it effective? What are the positive aspects? What are the negative aspects? And that is why, of course, research is such an integral part of your counselling training, because it gives us a separate view. It gives us a third eye on what we're being taught. There's our own practice. There's what we're being taught, I guess, by our tutors. There's our own practice in the, how we're taking the theory and using it with the supervisor. But then we're doing that 300,000 feet, if that's even the height, 300,000 feet view. And we're looking at the world. How is that approached? And certainly there's a lot of theories that are being looked at, because we're moving into a diverse society. One of the strong critiques of a lot of theory is that it wasn't very diverse. It didn't take on diversity, because diversity wasn't as visible when the theories were made as diversity is now. So really important part of study, I think.
It is. And what I like about research is it sets itself apart as being separate from opinion or thoughts or gut feels. And I think a main part of research is that you're going to be looking to, whatever your topic is, you're going to be looking to map that to data points, to evidence what you are looking to show. And I think that's top tip number one. When you, let's say you need to do a research project and you need to present that in some way, I think choosing an area where you can find data, where you can find data points is really important. So an example of an area where you may struggle to find data. And of course, this is different. If you may be doing a PhD, then you'd be looking for those areas to create your own data. But if it's a lower level presentation, you want to be citing, you want to be referencing, you want to be looking at what has already been done. So an example of a topic that may be difficult to do research on at a lower level is something like how the new AI apps influence counselling, because they've only just come to market. There's not been any time of them being out there. You would really struggle to find any meaningful data to back up a hypothesis in that kind of research. And I know, Rory, you went through a process of putting over 100 suggested topics together on research topics where you can actually find some data. And I know that is one of the handout sheets in our counselling study resource.
Absolutely, and that would be called secondary research.
Yeah,
where you're kind of looking at your what other people have said, and of course, research speaks to the word ontology. It's a lovely word, isn't it? And that is the classification and explanation of things. It's about inquiry and what you're going to examine, and I think it sets off curiosity. And as practitioners, we should always and continue to be curious and not take things too much on face value, because, the world changes, human beings change. And as I used to say to my students, we're not 1950s Americans living in the West Coast of America when we're studying Roger's work, or indeed TA, of course, we are contemporary people. And how does it fit contemporarily into the world? And, some of my students produce some fantastic research, debunking a lot of the kind of prized theories that are sometimes used in counselling, and they said they just don't work. They need adapting, they need altering, and here's the evidence. Point to the evidence, and that's the thing. It's okay, as you said, Ken, having an opinion, thinking, that doesn't work very well. But the thing about research is you've got to try and prove it, and you prove it not. You can prove it by what you do, but you can prove it by what other people have observed. So part of research is to cite people who have gone down the same road as you and have come up with a opposing opinion or a different opinion. So I think it's a really exciting part of counselling training, Ken.
I agree with you. It is. And one starts with perhaps a hypothesis of what you think might be an outcome. And the exciting part about research is you can find yourself going down very different roads to your original hypothesis. And that is what science is about, isn't it? It's opening doors and not relying on our biases, not trying to make the research fit the hypothesis we started with so that we've got a nice little package. I think this, and then here's the research that backs it up. Wow, yes, I was right about that. It's just got a confirmation of that bias. I like it when sometimes the research opens new doors. It maybe shows that we were not 100% on with that original hypothesis, and that's where the new learning sits.
Absolutely, and I like the word you use about confirming your biases, because there is a term for that in research called confirmation bias, where you tend to look for the things that agree with you and not the things that are opposite to your own opinion. That's broadly speaking confirmation bias. But it's mind opening, and also it sets you up because, as a student, you're at the beginning of your practice career. And, in 10 or 20 years, you may be teaching students, you may be shaping services. In shorter order than 10 or 20 years, it could be 5 or 10 years. Shaping services, you could be, writing, additions to theory, or even breaking ground on new ideas in counselling and psychotherapy. So I think it's really important that you get at certainly study level an idea of the foundations of how that is done, and that is done in research. Nobody's going to be taken seriously if you stand up and say, "Well, my opinion is."
Yes.
Even the most scholarly scholar says, "My opinion is," and this is backed up by, and produces the referencing and the evidence. So it is a really useful task, and also I think it's very undervalued in counselling training. It sometimes can be seen as a bit dry, but to be honest, Ken, it's where our profession lives and thrives.
It is, and you're 100% right when you speak about it being dry. It is an academic language doing research. It is that of academia, and it is written academically and it reads academically, and that can be quite heavy reading. I think of an ethical body that I once belonged to that would regularly send out a research magazine, and I really struggled to go through it unless there was a topic that really appealed to me. But it is in that research that the new ground is ploughed, that we move away from that does not work and closer to that does work. And we are, I think, a research-based rather than a gut feel based application of what we do. And of course, going back to the very basics of this again, when we're looking at the research, we're looking at that evidence, we're looking at the different data sets that we may be able to use. We have qualitative data, which would be numbers, mathematics, quantities, qualitative coming from the word quantity, in other words, numbers that you can add up and measure. And then, of course, quantitative being more the, that is the numbers, isn't it? It's qualitative. Qualitative, yes. Is more how people experience something and how they feed that back. So you may ask 10 people to give you their opinions on something, or ask them direct questions of how they experienced it. And that is, of course, qualitative. It is the quality of how they found it. Quantitative being numbers, where you might ask them to score something out of 10, or look at the amount of people that DNA'd out of 100, and now you're talking about those numbers. So there's kind of different ways of researching and evidencing that.
Absolutely, and I think just to take that point up, Ken, very simple way of mixing and blending those two basic approaches to research would be DNAs. People didn't turn up, so your quantitative would be how many people had appointments and how many people didn't turn up. And the qualitative may be to send out a research questionnaire to them and say, what is it? Why didn't you turn up? And then what you have then is you can then have a look at the stories or the lived experience of people. It could be something as simple as, well, I can't turn up because there's no bus route to your practice.
Yes.
In which case that gives you something then to use to go to the local authority and say, people can't get to their mental health appointments because there isn't a bus route. The buses don't run on time. And that's a great outcome of research. If they put the buses on, just something as simple as that. I mean, that's a very simplified explanation, but you've got the evidence of the numbers and you've got the evidence of the experience. What a great piece of research.
Yeah, and if you think about that, Rory, if you're kind of missing one of those elements, if you just take the numbers, the numbers, again, you can come out with a skewed result at the end of that. And this is why there is peer review in research, where you would put your research forward and you would put it in front of peers who are critical friends who would critique and look for holes, because of course the research, once it is published and it is out there, is cited by others and it is used as a reference point. So we want it to be accurate, and by putting it out to colleagues, I might do a DNA's research within my agency, Rory, and I might say that such a number did not arrive, but I might have missed out on looking at the the why they didn't arrive. And it could be something simple like a bus route has changed, or it's not on a bus route, as you've said. By putting that out to peers, it kind of opens fresh eyes over. So if you're doing a research project, maybe within your counselling training at the moment, get some peers to have a look over it. Get that peer review started nice and early.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's simple things that could bias a piece of research. So, a critique might be that they looked at the questionnaire and said, was it the buses not running on time that stopped you turning up?
A bit leading, Your Honour.
You're leading, Your Honour. So, yeah, it is very, very, very exciting. And I think there's another aspect to this, and this is one that's a little bit hidden, but really, really important, Ken. You go for a job or you go for a placement.
Yeah.
They may ask you a little bit about research. Certainly, if you go for a job, they may ask you about what research you have, because most people who offer jobs, be they from the local authority or be they charities, they gain funding, and that funding almost certainly is informed by research done by the organisations.
Yeah.
And if you come along and you can either understand the research, or you may have something to contribute to the research, or you understand the importance of it in terms of funding streams. We have to talk about money, unfortunately. You're more likely to be seen as someone who really understands counselling in a kind of more holistic way. And I'm afraid we do have to look at it in that way now because of the way we live. We live in an economy that favours funding models and evidence-based funding models. Yeah,
very much so. And we talk about kind of reviewing a client's journey, maybe asking them questions about how it is for them, and there being kind of schools of thought of, well, you shouldn't really be directly asking questions and delving in like that, but it is those questions that kind of inform the research. And you're speaking about funding, Rory, but basically if you look at in the UK, we have IAPT, and that is very research driven. There are assessments that are measuring the outcomes of that because it's government money that has been placed in a specific place, and it is based on the research, and it will change as research data changes, as that unrolls, to get best bang for the buck, sadly. But hopefully the research is also informing how we work and how we act and giving best service to our clients as well. But it does, I guess, have a little bit of a capitalist drive behind it in some instances, Rory.
Indeed, and it's not the government's money; it's our money.
Yeah, this is true. Yes, indeed.
It's our brass that that's taken out of our wage packet. So yeah, it's very, very important. But I also think it makes you more research makes you more open-minded, and if there's a profession that needs to be continually open-minded and curious, it is the world of counselling, because the human condition changes. People's aspirations change, and if we don't match that, if we don't pace that change of aspiration or that change of need, we're literally putting square pegs in round holes.
100%. Nothing kind of shines a spotlight on that more than a very recent pandemic, which kind of pulled the rug from face-to-face counselling, and many practitioners, thousands, tens of thousands, moving to online working, telephone working. And of course, the research in those areas has now become, the volume has gone up, shall we say, and we're getting more and more information that kind of informs what is working best there, who it is a best fit for. So it kind of, what happens in society, how the world evolves, kind of drives what kind of research is done. And I know that the NHS here in the United Kingdom has just opened a gaming and internet addictions centre, and that will be driven by the research of more and more people finding themselves going back to the games that I guess 10 years ago weren't even really, wasn't on anybody's radar. The research indicates where the funding goes, and work is delivered there. So it's such an important topic, and it is evergreen. It is always time for research, Rory.
Oh, absolutely, Ken, and you're absolutely right. You know, when I started, I do this in every podcast. When I started 20 years ago, I need a bit of a sticker.
Back when I started
20 years ago, don't you know, young person? When I started, We didn't even, I can safely say we didn't have the internet.
Yep.
And the internet and our society shapes the services of mental health. It either contributes to positive mental health, or sadly, as we've seen, certainly in gaming and addiction, it shapes negative aspects of mental health. And it's the research that drives the interventions that can make the difference for a person. And, if that's the way to leave this part of the podcast, it's just we're meeting the clients where they are.
Super duper handout on research for you, research methods that you can look over. Really handy if you are a student. If you haven't done your research yet, it's coming. Go and get the handout. Go to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. Find the podcast tab. Find your way to episode 260 right there on that page. Free of charge, you can download your research methods handout. Just click the little button and we will gladly email that through for you. And that is Theory in Practice. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. And moving away from theory and practice, we bring ourselves into practice today. Contemporary, what is happening right now in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And of course, we've just spoken about research, Rory, and I guess an ethical framework would in some way be underpinned by elements of research of what works and how we are best to show up in service of our clients. But ethical frameworks change as the times change, and we need to review it, and we've spoken about that a while back, many times over. We need to review the ethical framework a few times over and keep on going back to that to stay fresh and current, but taking it to supervision, Rory.
Yes, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Building our ethical framework into supervision. And this is something that comes up a lot in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. We're a closed group, knock on the door, and our friendly moderator will open the door, and you can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people, all talking about topics in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We have students, we have qualified colleagues, we have tutors, and we also have a lot of supervisors, and they all talk about different topics. And one of the threads that you see quite often within the Facebook group is about supervision. It's about supervision and the ethical framework, and what should I do? Is it ethical? And recently, I had one of my supervisees contact me about working with a client in the United States of America. And she said to me, what do you think? And I said, well, what does the ethical framework say? And because I've been working with this supervisee for a long time, she knew that one of the things that's expected, certainly in my supervision, is that the ethical framework is built in to any conversation that we have about, be it client work or actions taken within the work. And she said, I've spoken to the ethical body and they're going to send me some information, and I've got an appointment with them to ask a few questions. So I said, right. I said, so you've not got that information yet. And what we did is we booked sort of a half an hour mid appointment between supervisions just to talk through what she'd done. Now, the key thing here is that she built the ethical framework into a decision-making process. It wasn't an afterthought. In other words, oh, yes, I'll do that. And then, I'll have a look at the code of ethics. It was, what does the code of ethics say? I'm not sure about this. What interestingly transpired, and I don't want to go too much into this, was a really interesting conversation with her agency, where she had to educate the agency on international working. And she could do that because she could cite the ethical concerns and the ethical points within it was the ethical framework as opposed to a code of practice. They're interchangeable terms, really. And it's really, really, really important to build it in. And she was able to say to the person at the agency, said, there's no problem with this. To be able to say, actually, here are the challenges. And actually, how are you going to now build those challenges in to the way you communicate with therapists if this comes again. So it's a two-way street. That agency now is equipped with really good information and can now build that information into their codes of practice and transmit it down to the rest of the therapists if they're in that situation. And I'm really interested in a quote from the NCS's Code of Practice. And I said earlier that ethical frameworks and codes of practice, the terms are interchangeable. I'm a member of the NCS and they have what we call a Code of Practice. And they say, although these principles cannot be used to find a right or wrong ethical decision, they can be used to make a best clinical judgment. And that is the important bit of it, because if you have to justify what you've done, you have to demonstrate defensible decision making. And if you can cite the ethical framework as the way that you've gone about making a decision, that would almost certainly go in your favor. So the message is, when you've got anything, always, when you're working with anything and something's coming up, one of the roots should be, what does my code of practice, what does the ethics say about that?
Yeah. And so often we've said, your ethical framework, your code of practice comes into the counselling relationship in that very first session when you are contracting. You will be sharing with the client that you are a member of the such and such professional body and that you work to an ethical framework or an ethical practice. And so we're introducing it. So it's there with us in the sessions, in all of the sessions. It's woven through everything that we do. And it's right that it should be a base of supervision. And a good supervisor will bring the ethical framework up framework up as and when is required. But there's nothing to stop you as a practitioner going into your supervisor with the ethical framework in your hand and saying, you know what, I'd love to spend a supervision session looking over some elements of the ethical framework.
Yes, I'm sure there'll be supervisors all over the country now.
Celebrating
and seeing their supervisees march in, clutching their codes of practice and ethical frameworks and saying, I'd just like to. But there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. And, I think people sometimes think there's a missed opportunity here. Sometimes there's a thinking around supervision that it should always be about the clients. And of course, they should feature when necessary in supervision. But I think the wider aspects of our work and the ethical codes of practice and ethical frameworks fall into that are a valid topic of discussion. And, let's face it, they're asked for in assignments, they're asked for probably in interviews, but really after that, how often are they asked for? For those, for those colleagues who are qualified, how often do we think about ethical frameworks? And sadly, my thinking is that they're only asked for when something goes wrong.
Yes.
And if you can get to that point before something goes wrong by looking at the ethical framework, almost certainly it will save you. And I've always said this: the ethical framework is like a set of what we used to call, when we were children growing up in Manchester, monkey bars, like a steel frame full of cubes that children used to jump up and down on. You couldn't do it nowadays because of health and safety. But the main thing is that if you're inside the frame and as a child you slipped, you fell onto the next rung and you could hold on and you could just climb out. If you're on the outside of the frame, it's like a big metal cube made of scaffolding, and you fell, you're in for an almighty bump, And I think that's the metaphor of a framework. A framework is a structure that will hold you in place. And if you know how the structure works and what to hold on to, you're going to be in the best position should things go wrong, or should you have to make very tricky, very sensitive decisions.
Yeah. And those tricky, sensitive decisions can come out of nowhere. It can just be something that is said in a session. It's right there in front of you, right within that moment. So having that working knowledge, having looked over it on a regular basis, having gone into supervision and discussed it, having gone into supervision, discussed client presentations and how you worked with that and how that might relate to the ethical framework. So it's exercising your knowledge of that ethical framework just gives you a much clearer understanding of where the boundaries of that that play park that you're talking about, Rory, are, so that you know that you can stay inside. And what you don't want to be doing, as you said, Rory, is so many times it's only looked at when something goes wrong. What you don't want to be doing is almost kind of something goes wrong, finding yourself going and getting a copy of the ethical framework, even being surprised and going, oh, I see they've updated this. This has changed now, blowing the dust off it, in other words, and opening it up like this is something that underpins who we are and how we practice. It kind of guides us in best practice and how to keep ourselves safe, our practice safe, and our clients safe. That's what it's there for. I think it's a really interesting topic. I think it linking into supervision is interesting. We've spoken about ethical frameworks many times, but linking it into supervision, that's exciting for me.
It is. And, I think it's said by a lot of professional or ethical bodies that is good practice in supervision. I often ask, so what's the ethical aspect to this? Because every action we take as therapists has an ethical aspect. Yeah. It does. Whether it's challenging a client who's turned up consistently late, or whether we find that we're working with a client who's known to someone we do, and that whole dual relationship issue, it happens. And my sense is it happens more than it doesn't. And by having a good understanding and an open conversation with your supervisor about the ethical framework, you're going to be in a better position to be able to make the right decisions in service of your client.
Thank you, Rory. Great topic. Moving on now to Practice Matters. This is our CPD section. You met up with Kate, Rory, from NCS, soon to be, I just had an email, soon to be NCPS at the moment, National Counselling Society, about to be National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. But you spoke about accreditation and course recognition.
Indeed. And for those of you who are regular listeners to the podcast, you might have listened to the podcast before this, which was published on the 1st of April 2023, which was a special edition podcast with Meg Moss, who is the policy specialist at the NCS. And it kicks off a short series of podcasts looking at the internal workings of an ethical body, the NCS, the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. And we met up with Kate Mahoney, who is the head of professional standards, and she talks about accreditation and course recognition. And this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
And to continue our series of speaking with those who work with the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. They're going through a renaming phase at the time of recording. It's my great pleasure to welcome Kate Mahoney, who's Head of Training, Services and Professional Standards. Kate, you're very welcome.
Morning, Rory. Lovely to be back with you on podcast.
Yes, and today you're going to be speaking about accreditation and course recognition. So, in line with a lot of ethical bodies, you run an accreditation scheme, and to do that, I guess you're going to have to recognise the courses that those who want to be accredited with you have taken as part of for want of a better phrase, a quality standards check.
Yeah, we do. You're right.
So, in terms of accreditation, what does accreditation mean with regards to training?
So when it comes to training accreditation, I suppose the word accreditation it's quite a fancy way of just saying that the course has been fully assessed to ensure it meets certain standards and criteria. And it's important because it allows graduates of a certain course to apply to go on an accredited register. So when we run our assessment process, for accreditation, we look at everything that's actually being taught on the course and how it's being delivered. So whether that be delivery of content in a classroom or through a blended learning method of teaching. So we have a look at that. We also consider how placements are managed, as well as all the assessments that are incorporated in the course. And in addition to that, as part of the process, we very carefully review external examiners' reports, and we also make sure that tutors are suitably qualified and experienced to deliver that level of training. So it's a pretty thorough process, I can say. And once we've got an accreditation of a course, we look to reaccredit every 5 years. That ensures that we're making sure that the high standards and criteria are being met on an ongoing process. But of course, we forge really close relationships with our training providers. So we keep in contact with them constantly anyway and monitor any updates or changes that they might make, just so that we can review them and make sure that everything's still up to scratch. So although we go through this sort of rigorous process at the beginning and every 5 years, we sort of officially renew the course accreditation yearly as well, but that's a little bit more of a softer touch. But as I say, because we've got these great relationships, we pretty much know how the courses are being delivered all the time, really. And I've got to say, personally, I absolutely love being involved in the accreditation process, because one of my huge passions, obviously having gone through training myself and been a student many, many years ago, far too many than I care to share. But what it gives me the opportunity to do, and my assessment team, is to ensure that the students get the best experience and learning they can from their training. And by having this accreditation programme, it's a great way to ensure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to meeting standards and criteria. So that's what accreditation means there.
Okay, and just to be clear, so someone may be listening, doing a course now, undertaking a course, maybe they did a level 4, and there's always a bit of a confusion about accreditation, isn't there? Because it's used in so many different aspects. Yeah. So accreditation of a course, to my understanding, is that someone who's running a course can go to the NCS as it stands now and ask for the course to be reviewed and given an accreditation. Would that be a correct interpretation?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, for those of listening who think, well, is that anything to do with being an accredited therapist? There is, I guess there is a connection there, because that would go towards personal accreditation.
It does. It absolutely does. And I think that's something that we could sort of answer as the podcast goes through. But yes, that's what it does mean. So accreditation, if you think about it, we have an accredited register. Okay, accreditation links to accredited register. So what it's saying to us is that this type of training that has this stamp of approval, that has been assessed at this level, enables people to have that confidence that they're learning stuff and they're getting the experience to then be able to apply to an accredited register.
Right, I think that's really clear. And he did mention blended learning. What does blended learning mean?
Yeah, so this is all a little bit new, really, in the last few years. And I know that it takes us back through the COVID phase, and it's a bit of a distant memory now, I suppose. But I know COVID gave us an awful lot of challenges, but it also enabled us to get some really positive stuff out of it. So in the past, before COVID, one of the main criteria for courses to have an accreditation recognition was that they had to have all the teaching and learning in a classroom, face-to-face. So, you'd go along to your venue and you do your teaching and your learning. But obviously with COVID, suddenly there was a huge shift to everybody having to move into an online space, into an online environment, something that we'd sort of not really done for core counselling training ever, because of the fact that this criteria of face-to-face in the classroom was really, really key. And during that phase of COVID learning, a lot of people sort of found really beneficial ways of getting to a bigger audience, or enabling people to be able to do an awful lot more check-in work and things like that, and practice work, so they didn't have to travel so much. So their experiential learning as well. And many trainers, training providers found that the online classroom teaching was actually really beneficial for both them and their students. So when we sort of started to come out of the COVID phase, realizing that the world had changed quite considerably with regards to what was available to us and what actually we didn't think would be beneficial, would work. Actually, it was sort of giving some really good and positive results. So a lot of training providers were quite keen to continue trying to work in this way for part of their training courses. So, we did a lot of consideration, and along with other similar talking therapy AR holders, so accredited rarity holders, so other professional bodies, we worked with them and decided to update the standards across the board to allow that for qualifying courses to be able to offer a small percentage of their training to happen synchronously online. And so what that means is that you're in a sort of a live environment with a tutor there, but you're actually in a video space, a video online space. So we decided across the board, as I say, with other AR holders, that up to 30% of the training could happen synchronously online. And as I say, that's a positive step forward. It's really flexible and with regards to sort of how things have moved on. But of course, that synchronicity, I'll put my teeth back in, that allows for you to still be together and at the same time and learn together at the same time and have that feedback. So that's where that difference comes in, because it's not just picking up a course at a different time and picking up lessons at a different time. That's what we consider as sort of more distant learning, sort of self-taught aspect. But I think it's really, really great that the NCS is adapting to the times and is recognised the benefits of being able to have this blended approach to learning, this online teaching space. And it just goes to show that even something as established as accreditation criteria can really evolve and change for the better. So I think it's been really positively taken up, And again, some training providers may decide that they want to do everything in the classroom. That's up to them. But we do give the ability for them to choose whether they want to sort of add that blended approach to their core training now.
Yes, and I think that's really clear. I think just to add another layer of clarity is that we get a lot of inquiries about people who train solely online and never see a tutor. And there's a difference between synchronous and asynchronous learning. So what you're describing, Kate, is synchronous, where training is being carried out in real time. We're meeting on the Zoom platform today to carry out this interview. So there would be students in a Zoom room or maybe a Microsoft Teams room. Teaching would take place. They would all be together. They may use the breakout rooms for PD groups or for skills training or that type of thing. Asynchronous learning is where someone takes a online course, and there are a lot of online courses that purport to be practitioner training courses. But I'm guessing you wouldn't accredit a course that didn't have any literal teachers stood in front of you in real time.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Rory. You're right with that. And I think it is really important to make that to bring that clarity in, because you do see some courses that will say that they are accredited and that they're just purely distant learning or purely online only courses. And later on, in our sort of conversation, there's we can explain that a little bit more as we go through. But it is really important that courses that you choose to do for your core training to be able to support you to apply to go on an accredited register, which is what we wholeheartedly support. That in the room training in front of a tutor in a live environment is absolutely key. And as I say, we've moved for it not to be 100% online. So there's that 30% that we've agreed that is a very sort of suitable space to be. So, the rest of the 70% of the teaching would be in your actual classroom environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that clears that up. So I guess there'll be a lot of people out there asking the question, how can I be sure when I choose a course that it'll be giving me the training I need to become suitably qualified to practice? We get a lot of letters in the mailbag here at CT Towers, Counselling Towers, about this. So I wonder if you could clear that up for us, Kate.
Absolutely. So, as we were saying, we've been talking a little bit about what's really important as part of a core training course. So if you're looking for a course that meets the standards required to apply for our accredited register, then, listening to this podcast, you're in the right place, because if you choose a course that's been accredited by the NCS, it gives you peace of mind that it's met all the criteria that we're looking for the accredited register. And the accredited registers, relevant talking therapy accredited registers across the profession. As I say, we work very closely with other professional bodies to make sure that the standards are a minimum level of standards across the board. So it makes it a very level playing field. And to make it easy for you, we've got a course search function on our website homepage where you can find NCS accredited courses that are available. It's a really straightforward process looking for them. So you can find a course that's, right for you and right for your career goals. But as I say, it's important to note that, yes, there are other courses out there available that don't necessarily hold NCS accreditation. But really, when you're looking to do your training, it's essential to ensure that the training content meets the requirement for registration for an accredited registrar. I can't sort of labour that point more. It's so important. And if you were to take a course that doesn't have NCS accreditation, that's fine as long as it meets the criteria. But what happens post-graduation if you come to apply to the accredited register with us? The process might take a little bit longer because we might require a little bit of additional information to support the application, but we are always there to support you through the process. Because, if it's not on a course that we know of, that we've accredited, we just might need to be a little bit more confident of what that training has actually offered, and to make sure that the content, the clinical experience that you've had through your for your placement really is sound to meet the registration requirements. So, that's that little bit about how can you make sure that, you're getting the right sort of training. But whilst I talk about NCS accredited courses, there's also some benefits of choosing one of those courses. Not only is it known to us, and therefore, when you graduate, it's a quicker process to come onto the accredited register when you apply, because we know the training you've done. But as a student member of an NCS accredited course, you have so many benefits that you can access throughout your training. For example, discounted prices on books, good practice guidance staff, extra CPD if you want a little bit more knowledge in certain areas, or if you've got to write an assessment about a certain thing and you want certain information, from ethics point of views, from, as I say, good practice guidance working in certain types of areas. And also you can access reduced fee personal counselling and supervision should you need it. Some courses require you to do personal counselling. It's a very beneficial experience to do as part of your training. And you'll need supervision when you go on placement. Some placements provide it, some don't. So our experienced registrant members have come together, and many of them offer a reduced fee for those that are in training, because we know that there's a huge commitment, financial as well as personal time, to training to be a counsellor. And also, if your placement doesn't provide it, you can get money off your personal indemnity insurance. So there's quite a lot of benefits of choosing an NCS accredited course from that perspective as well. But really, to sum up, it's just really recommended that you choose a course that supports the criteria for you to be able to apply to go on an accredited register when you graduate.
Yes, and that was going to be my next question. Lots of questions on our Facebook page, lots of questions in emails that land in my email bag on what type of course is suitable. So when we're looking at training courses, they often mention guided learning hours, which is sometimes known as GLH in the teaching trade. As a former lecturer, I'm quite aware of that. Yeah. And tutor-led hours, which is TLH. And the total qualification time, which is, confused I am, TQT.
Yes, so, it's acronym city.
Yeah, so acronym city. So what do they mean and why are they important?
Really good question, that, because we do get a lot of people that ask a question to us when they're doing their applications, and it can be quite a confusing space. As I say, I sort of joke and say it's acronym city, but it very much is in our profession. So guided learning hours or tutor-led hours, as you've just mentioned, GLH or TLH, they're essentially the hours that are spent with a tutor in a classroom or in an online real-time synchronous space that, having your actual tuition. And so that can include group or individual tutorials, any sort of PD groups that you're going through, personal development stuff, your skills practice where you're being observed, or any other contact time, physical contact time that you have with your tutor live in a live environment. On the other hand, the total qualification time, so TQT as you sometimes see it, that includes all the hours of learning and assessment that is required to complete your qualification. So TQT will include GLH and TLH. So there we go. All the acronyms in one sentence for you. So, but it can sound a bit confusing, but that's really the sort of straightforward process of how we look at these hours. Now, guided learning hours, they're not the self-guided stuff. Okay, that's what comes into TQT, the total qualification. And the TQT can vary from training provider to training provider, as can the guided learning hours. But there is there's a general feel that you're looking for a good core training qualification. Really, your guided learning hours need to be in sort of realms of around 300 hours. TQT can be anything really after that. But the real-time guided learning hours, or the tutor-led hours, they're the essential point of counselling training because they really provide that structured and supervised learning environment for students to develop their counselling skills. So when we're talking about, a minute ago, we were talking about blended learning and why it's important that we still feel that face-to-face stuff and in-the-room stuff is really important. This is where this guided learning hours bit comes in. So the guided learning hours, really, they let students practice their counselling skills in a safe environment because you've got the support of a qualified tutor who will have been a counsellor or still is a counsellor, giving you feedback and helping you with your sort of, development of your performance of experiential work. And in addition, your guided learning hours also offer you students to develop your interpersonal skills and build your relationships with your peers and your tutors and other people that are involved in the assessment process of the work that you're doing. Which is why it gives us that reason and that understanding and that rationale as to why distance learning only qualifications aren't accepted for applications to an accredited register. Because that crucial part of the learning, the core counselling training that we're looking at, really has to have that individual one-to-one group touch point live.
Yeah, so a summary would be that if you're listening to this and you're thinking of doing some core training, the questions you should be asking yourself is, does it have a minimum of 300 hours guided learning hours? And also, is it either in a classroom or synchronous at some point? And if it doesn't have either of those, it's very likely the qualification would not allow you to practice or join an ethical body. And I think it's worth mentioning that the specifications for ethical bodies and counselling in general's qualifications can be somewhat different to the specifications the government lay down. So we see a lot of people, certainly in England, talk about off-qual qualifications, and there's a lot of off-qual qualifications that although you get a certificate and you get a level 4 certificate in counselling, therapeutic counselling, may not allow you to join an ethical body and may not allow you to get work. It's one of those strange anomalies. So always check, listen to Kate's wise words, and always check, what course you're doing if you're thinking of picking a course. Now, one final question. There's obviously a lot of professional bodies. I think I counted 11 at the last count. There's probably 4 that are in core counselling. Some are, specialist areas such as children. There's some there's one organisation that works with people of a faith position and is set for people of the Christian faith. So is it only NCS accredited training that enables you to get on the accredited register? I guess my question is, if someone's gone with another ethical body's training, can they still get on the accredited register?
So, yeah, good question again. Absolutely. If that core training has got all the criteria that meets the requirements for applying to an accredited register, absolutely. But as I was saying before, if it's a course that we don't recognise directly, we just need to put a little bit more work in to have a look at what that course entails. Yeah. So we might, as I say, need to do a little bit more digging about, see what course content there is. But yes, it doesn't have to be the NCS accreditation course to get onto the NCS register. We're very aware that there are other courses out there that really do give you a substantially sort of whole requirement of what you need. But as I was saying, if you did do the NCS accreditation course, there is that sort of quicker route in after graduation, and there's all those other benefits you get as a student. But you can also join as a student if you're on a course that isn't accredited by us. Our doors are open. We are very welcoming of all. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
I think so. And if anybody has any questions about accreditation, course recognition, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, click the podcast tab, go on to episode 260, and in the show notes, Kate's provided a link where you can click on make contact and answer questions. And finally, why are professional standards important in training? The final question, really, why do we go through all this, Kate?
Well, that's a mainstay of what I do in my job. So I'm so pleased that professional standards are so important because that's why I'm here. And really, in the sort of professional space, it is the heart of everything we do is about public protection. So it is really crucial that we monitor and maintain professional standards when it comes to training, because that helps us to fulfill that responsibility. So having confidence and trust in how our registrants have been trained and assessed to work ethically and safely is absolutely paramount. It's paramount for all accredited register holders. So by adhering to a minimum level of standards, professional standards in training, we can ensure that registrants are equipped to provide the best possible service to the public, because they have been taught at a level that we can feel confident that they have competence to put in the service that is required. And that also enhances the reputation of the profession. So, in terms of managing the standards for training, making sure that people are competent to do the job, it promotes that public confidence in what we do. And not only that, standards, they have a place to ensure consistency as well in the quality of training and education across our practitioners. So again, promoting uniformity, which also then knocks on effect to the help the public and our stakeholders having trust in what we're doing. We've got, when I say stakeholders, things like EAPs and counselling agencies, if they come to the accredited registers and they look for registrants, or they take registrants who are on an accredited register, they know that those practitioners have been equipped with the necessary knowledge and skills to provide those services. And again, professional standards all links into ethical principles across the profession. Again, another essential part of protecting the rights and the well-being of the clients that we work with. So it's not only important for qualified practitioners to have, that adherence to standards, but also those that are completing, they're not just the qualified practitioner, but the ones that are in their training. So when you're going to placements and you're doing your placement training work and all of that, part of the sort of journey that you're going through, knowing that your placement work is being managed by those who understand professional standards and ethical working, so they can support you to get the best out of what you're doing. So it's really, it boils down to sort of the crucial maintenance of public trust in the services that we offer. So,
well, I think on that clarion call, to professionalism. Kate Mahoney, Head of Training Services and Professional Standards with the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Kate from the NCS. Thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out and having the discussions, bringing us the interesting information. This has been episode 260 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with theory in practice, looking at theory in practice by looking at preparing for your research project. In practice today, we talked about building the ethical framework into your supervision with your supervisor, making it a living part of your supervision practice and indeed your practice in general. And then finally, we met up with Kate Mahoney, Head of Professional Standards at the NCS, kicking off our season of looking behind the curtain at a professional body, and she talks about accreditation and course recognition. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.